What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh.
And I'm your host, Austin.
And I'm Daniel.
We're back with another one for you today. This is really the real-life boogeyman.
Yeah.
There's really no other way to put it.
In the flesh.
In the flesh. And it's a very disturbing case for sure. But also we have a little bit of an urban legend. Cropsey, if you've ever heard of that before. And there was a film that came out a few years back, or actually it's been a number of years now since that documentary film came out called Cropsey.
Which I highly recommend.
Yeah,
It's
really good.
Great documentary.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes and description for you. It's free to watch on YouTube. Very well done. It gives you, a lot of perspective of the area that this case takes place. We're going to be talking about Staten Island.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been to Staten Island?
I don't know. I haven't. I've been to New York City 2 times, but only like Manhattan, Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Never to
I
Staten.
kind of want to go to Staten Island, honestly.
Yeah. Do you?
Yeah, I kind of do. I there's something about Staten Island. I think they get
Maybe it's underrated.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea that, it's a dump. It feels like they get dumped on a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like always like, one of the famous people from Staten Island that, I always hear about, Pete Davidson, of course, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's from Staten Island, and just hearing his jokes about it and stuff. And
yeah.
But I don't know. There's something about the people there. There's this like grittiness to them and this realness to them that I love. And their accent is beautiful.
I love it too.
I want to go to an Italian deli on Staten Island and then go look for Cropsey. That sounds like a good day to me.
Yeah, and I guess I can't talk because I love Detroit and Hamtramck, which outsiders see as like grungy and nasty and violent. So who am I to talk shit about Staten Island? It's probably a great place.
I'm sure it is. I've never been to Detroit, so I can't speak on that, but
you should swing by sometime.
I hear good things. Place. I mean, the Great Lakes look pretty dope. So
beautiful.
You've sold me on that.
Yeah.
A trip to the Great Lakes.
The water alone.
Yeah. And not having to worry about sharks,
Yeah,
that's
true. Yeah.
There's nothing that's going to eat you in the Great Lakes.
Nope. As far as I know.
As far as you know, yeah. But yeah, today we're going to be taking a look at the legend of Cropsey and the real life boogeyman, Andre Rand. And this case is interesting because, we're going to be talking about children that disappeared on Staten Island. Some were found, some were not found. And, this case reminds me a lot of the Son of Sam case in many ways.
There's actually a small point of connection between the two. Yeah. The church we'll talk about.
Yeah. The Process Church of Judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. I did a 2-part episode on Son of Sam. Way back. Yeah. It's been a long time. But that case really creeped me the fuck out because this time period of like the 70s and 80s obviously was the height of the Satanic Panic. And so people were really, really scared of this idea of, satanic worshipers, devil worshipers, kidnapping kids, sacrificing them, blood rituals and all that kind of stuff. So it's something to keep in mind through this because you definitely see that play a big role in Andre Rand's case.
Definitely.
But this is an individual who literally got locked up for the rest of his life based on basically no physical evidence as far as we know.
Yep.
Which is pretty crazy.
Testimony, yeah.
Circumstantial, purely. And despite that, though, this guy is a real creep.
He's a menace, yeah.
Like definitely a very, very dangerous dude. But it's very interesting to kind of go back to this time period and really see how this all unfolds because I think it's just so different than I think how things would play out today. Probably because we are, maybe desensitized or just more knowledgeable around, satanic worshipers, and also just, police investigations are done a little bit differently than they were back then. But what's also interesting about this is we have a state hospital for handicapped children that is also absolutely terrifying to hear about and even think that this was a real place.
It might possibly be more horrific than Cropsey. Like this idea of this ward, I guess, where all these children were just neglected and abused because they were, intellectually disabled or whatever. Their families just abandoned them at this place, and total horror.
Yeah. I mean, just the way that they looked at disabled, people in general back then is just so scary and horrible. I mean, they just didn't look at them as people anymore.
Right.
And there was also a film done by Geraldo Rivera,
the famous reporter. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's on YouTube as well. And that's terrifying to watch because he goes in there to the state hospital. And it's just,
he does a whole expose on it.
Yeah, it's sickening.
And I'm like, how do you air some of that stuff? Some of that footage was like really disturbing. Kids on the floor, like covered in feces and stuff. It's wild.
Yeah, this one's just all around terrifying from start to finish. So let's start things though by talking about the legend of Cropsey, because this is kind of where, I think this really puts you in the mind frame of where people, what people were thinking about, what kids were aware of, teenagers were aware of back in the 1970s in New England, this urban legend of Cropsey, or this like boogeyman that would, kidnap and murder children, seemed to be a pretty popular thing. And people were legitimately scared of Cropsey. So if we go back to the beginning of the 1970s, the legend of Cropsey terrified generations of New England children, especially in the Staten Island area. Many believe the folktale first originated at a summer camp somewhere in the state of New York. And depending on who you ask, the tale might change, but almost all of Cropsey's origin stories begin with a family tragedy. So the way the story goes is, in one early version, a well-respected judge named George Cropsey, his wife, and their son often visited a small summer cottage near Matson Lake, located near Camp Lakota Summer Camp in Wurtsboro, New York. And one day, a group of campers snuck out of evening activities to make a bonfire outside the designated fire areas and roast some marshmallows. And this caused a fire to spread out from the camp and along the lakeside. The flames soon engulfed the Cropsey's home, and that's when George returned to find his home ablaze. His wife had managed to make it outside to safety, but the screams of his dying son came from inside the burning home, and at this point, it was too late. George tried to make his way inside the inferno, suffering burns across his arms and face, but he wasn't able to make it to his son without also succumbing to the smoke and flames, so he retreated. After the fire was put out, firefighters found the charred remains of George's son inside. In the following days, George Cropsey's wife suddenly died of grief. George then lost grip on reality, as the grief was too much to bear. He then vanished for several weeks, only to return, seeking revenge on the campers nearby. And during these several weeks, some believe he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital during a psychotic break, but then escaped. Toward the end of summer, Cropsey waited until nightfall to sneak into the summer camp, when he started kidnapping and murdering the campers one by one. His first victim was discovered on the lake shore. The child had been abducted, dragged to the edge of camp, and chopped to death with an axe. Counselors and camp management considered closing the camp for the rest of the season, but it remained open, which is part of the urban legend. Of course they decided to keep it open, right?
Yeah.
Well, we just found a poor kid chopped up by the lake.
Yeah.
Summer camp's got to go on.
Narratively, we need to keep the deaths rolling.
Right. Yeah. Right. Otherwise, we don't have much of a story here.
Right.
So according to the story, state troopers were stationed around the camp at night. Each counselor began sleeping with a knife, axe, or even a gun. But Cropsey always found a way to sneak into the campsites undetected. One night at about 3 a.m., one of the counselors woke up to the screams of a camper. Clicking on his flashlight, he pointed the light across the campsite, and there he spotted the camper falling to the ground covered in blood, and a dark figure towered over the camper, wielding an axe. The counselor became the first witness to see Cropsey and survive, but only for a second. He described him as a man with chalk-white hair, red bloodshot eyes, and burn wounds that covered his face. When Cropsey noticed the light on him, he began to flee, but the counselor snatched a nearby hatchet and caught up to him. He was able to clip Cropsey's leg with that hatchet, but he got away, leaving a trail of blood behind him. The counselor then phoned the state troopers, who tracked his blood trail deeper into the nearby woods. They weren't able to spot him, but his deranged laughter gave away his location. And unfortunately, every time they got close to the sound of that laughter, it would vanish and shift through the woods. So they decided, you know what, we're going to smoke him out. So let's just set a controlled forest fire to do this.
It's just crazy.
Which I'm like, holy shit, dude.
We can't find this murderer. Let's risk setting this whole forest on.
Because this is a totally legitimate way that state troopers capture people.
Right.
They just smoke them out. Dear God. By morning, they still couldn't find Cropsey's remains, but they assumed that he was dead. They assumed wrong, right? It's also believed that on the anniversary of his son's death, Cropsey's apparition can be seen limping along the shore of Lake Maston. Cropsey's legend spread by word of mouth across New England, and many camp counselors use this story for late-night scares, but also as a tool to promote fire safety on the campgrounds, or a way to keep kids away from dangerous areas. And depending on who's telling the story and where, Cropsey's reign of terror changes. In some stories, he's a hardware store owner, a member of the city council, a county judge, or a retired businessman, and he always suffers the loss of a child or his entire family. And regardless of which version is told, Cropsey's victims are always children. Many times he drags them out of their tents with his hook hand, axes them to death, or sets fire to their cabins out of revenge. And in every story after his supposed death, there is always a lingering question of whether he managed to survive and continues abducting and killing children in the night. Boy Scout camps, summer jobs, middle schools, high schools, and even universities became hotspots for the Cropsey folktale in the late 70s and 80s, and his story even spread through New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. By 1981, the slasher movie The Burning was made, and it was inspired by the Cropsey story. But this wasn't the only slasher with a maniac killing campers, since Friday the 13th was released just the year before, which that's an iconic film. And Sleepaway Camp would premiere in 1983. The box offices loved horror stories involving campers being butchered to death by deranged killers. In Staten Island, their Cropsey legend was a bit different than the others. They told the story of a killer who escaped from a mental institution and lived in the tunnels beneath the old abandoned Willowbrook institution, which is the institution we've been talking about earlier. He would come out at night and kidnap children off of the streets, and they would never be seen again. In reality, many children at the time were actually disappearing, so much so that it became an ongoing problem, especially for the NYPD and local communities. Although Cropsey was only a scary campfire story and a tool for safety, many Staten Island kids ended up believing he wasn't just some made-up folktale, but a real killer in the flesh. And soon enough, they might have been proven right. So that leads us to the real Cropsey.
Yeah.
The case of Andre Rand.
Yeah, so this is highly disturbing and really sets the scene for the fear of, like, I don't know, if kids go missing in your neighborhood, and the police aren't like, hey, we have a suspect. What else are you going to do besides just have a scary story of, like, don't go in the woods. He's out there somewhere.
And especially disappearing without a trace. They're not able to really find anything.
Yeah, no remains. Yeah. Also, I apologize. I had a head cold over the weekend, so my voice is a little different. So don't yell at me.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you sound pretty good.
All right. I'm not too nasally.
No.
Okay.
Maybe just a teensy
little
bit.
So Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, home to nearly 500,000 people, and families moved here to own their own land just across the water from the cramped, dense city where Manhattan is. But this precious space also came at a cost, because in the mid-1900s, Staten Island got the reputation for having the largest dumping grounds for New York City's garbage.
Which is why people call it a dump.
Yeah.
Because there's literally a dump.
The largest dump in New York City is there, yeah.
That sucks for the people of Staten Island.
I know, because they kind of went there to, like, have a little bit more of this, like, suburban feel. So you're
a little more,
this, like,
more room
dense,
to breathe. And they're like, how about we dump all 8 million people's garbage on nearby your land?
Right. And even worse, it also became a dumping ground for displaced mental institution patients and the corpses of murder victims of organized crime. So its open space, which was once seen as a luxury, became fuel for horror stories. At the center of the island is a stretch of forest called the Greenbelt, and bordering this forest is a scout camp, an abandoned tuberculosis ward of Seaview Hospital in Willowbrook, along with the other abandoned Willowbrook institution buildings, which we've been talking about. To the Staten Island children, this forest soon became Cropsey's domain. And in an expose of the Willowbrook Institution in 1972, which we were just hinting at, the famous journalist Geraldo Rivera, this is when he made his big break. And his footage showed intellectually disabled children naked, lying on the floor, some covered in feces. He described it as smelling, quote, of death. And he described the school as, quote, the town's leper colony. Even the employees complained of horrible conditions, and accusations of physical and sexual abuse surfaced soon after. Okay, so this is a disgusting part of this. This institution also had a hepatitis research center, and if these children were there for over 6 months, they would kind of just assume, okay, their parents kind of just threw them in here, threw the key away, they're never going to see them again. So reports claim that the researchers would inject healthy children with syringes, giving them hepatitis to study the effects. That's how we are in full nightmare horror mode here.
It's mind-blowing to think that this was even allowed to exist. Like,
right.
And it, as we'll see, clearly it was breaking a lot of legal boundaries there.
Yeah.
But it just, there was nobody checking in on this, or like, and this was just something they did.
Yeah.
You know, this wasn't the only place that this kind of thing happened, but
no, there just wasn't, there weren't laws to protect people like this with disabilities or just abandoned by their family. They're just left up to do whatever with, apparently. And it took over 10 years and countless lawsuits to finally shut down the institution after public outcry. Luckily, changes in federal legislation finally began protecting people with disabilities who were institutionalized, but many of the children of Willowbrook were transferred to other group homes or institutions. And unfortunately, I came across this New York Times investigation in 2020, and this investigation discovered that many of these children, now adults, were still suffering abuse in these like smaller group homes or wherever they ended up. So it's like we still haven't even really fixed the issues here, but a few stragglers from Willowbrook at the time with nowhere to go, some of them allegedly took shelter in the abandoned buildings of the 375-acre institution. Some fled to the subterranean tunnel system below, and this tunnel system has been described as, quote, a wheel with spokes that connects many of the abandoned Willowbrook buildings together. Others who were displaced from the institution or homeless built small shanties in the forest, and even some of the staff members who lost their jobs joined the shanty community. In the 70s and 80s, 7 children from the Staten Island area suddenly disappeared, and the local Staten Island Cropsey legend was born through that. So basically, Cropsey is just this deranged man possibly living in these tunnels, and he comes out at night and snatches the children, and then they're never seen again. So this area became kind of the spot where you only go there if it's a dare or you're curious and you want to check it out. But this was seen like in children's lore here was
it's terrifying honestly to look at, like,
and like the pictures are, it seems like it comes out of a horror story.
And I know some people have even mentioned that they believe this area is haunted.
Oh, I believe
and that
it,
they've had paranormal experiences around, especially the old Willowbrook buildings and stuff, which just all the atrocities that were committed there against these poor children. And
I know in the Cropsey documentary, they even go in some of these abandoned buildings, which just seemed terrifying.
Yeah.
Pitch black.
Well, and then you don't know who's out there.
Right.
You know, there's obviously a lot of homeless people that migrate out there, and lots of little encampments out there, and scary graffiti, and, you know, as we'll talk about in a bit.
And it's wild that, I mean, I don't know if all of these buildings still exist, but it's wild that they've just sat derelict. Like,
you would think they'd like
government
tear it down,
right,
and like
for safety or
right.
something.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
or repurposed the buildings at some point. Now they're completely run down and like the roofs are blown out and stuff. But yeah, it's weird that they just went derelict. But I get it. I mean, again, I'm seeing Detroit during its really sad days. Yeah, some of those beautiful historic buildings just go to waste.
Today's episode is brought to you by one of my favorite apps, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. I mean, we all want to grow our savings these days. And one of the sneakiest things is subscriptions, because it's easy to sign up for one. It's usually kind of difficult to unsubscribe with most companies or services out there, and they're just easy to lose track of. And that's the beauty of Rocket Money, is that when you get logged in with the Rocket Money app, you can add all of your accounts, your credit cards to it, and it will do all the hard work for you. It'll actually sort through all of your transactions. It'll give you a beautiful list of subscriptions that you're paying for. It'll also tell you when your bills are due and when they're coming out of your account, which is also very helpful for, managing your spending. Rocket Money will actually go out there and cancel those unwanted subscriptions for you, which is a beautiful thing. It's just so easy, so simple. And one of their coolest features is the ability to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and then Rocket Money takes care of the rest, and they'll go out and deal with customer service for you. And then it will, employ some hardcore negotiating skills to try to get those bills down. So it's worth trying. It doesn't always work, but it's definitely worth a try. Rocket Money has over 5 million users, including myself, and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, which is absolutely insane to think about. $500 million of unwanted subscriptions canceled by Rocket Money, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/lightsout. That's rocketmoney.com/lightsout. Seriously, stop what you're doing, pause the video, go to rocketmoney.com/lightsout. Try it. It's free. Just go download it for us. It really helps us out. And Rocket Money has just been an absolute rock solid sponsor of the show. So thank you, Rocket Money.
All right, but moving on, by 1987, the folktale of a deranged man lurking in the woods of Staten Island had quickly become reality. And on July 9th of that year, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome, Jennifer Lynn Schweiger, went missing. This was the same year Willowbrook had shut down. Jennifer had attended public school 022 Graniteville in Staten Island, and she had recently graduated from their special education program. She had a passion for dancing, and her mother described her as a happy and very loving child. On that hot afternoon, Jennifer was restless while her mother did housework. So Mrs. Schweiger told Jennifer, hey, go for a walk, get some energy out. And this wasn't unusual, especially because Jennifer knew to stay around the safe 3-block radius that she usually played in. She was also very well known to all the neighbors, and they typically looked after her if they saw her outside. But when Jennifer never returned home that day, her mother reported her as missing. Hundreds of people volunteered in the community search party, day and night. Neighbors also tied yellow ribbons to houses, telephone poles, and trees lining the streets of Westerleigh. Some took their flashlights and headed to the abandoned Willowbrook buildings, even down into the underground tunnels. Police also swept the area near Willowbrook with no luck. 2 witnesses told police that they saw Jennifer on the day of her disappearance walking down the street with a middle-aged man. The man was seen holding onto a woman's green bicycle with a basket on the front. Detective Bobby Jensen of the NYPD soon recognized a familiar face from a prior case in a local shopping market parking lot. It was a 43-year-old man named Andre Rand. He had a criminal record. Bobby apparently saw him riding a woman's green bicycle with a basket on the front, just like the eyewitness had described. When stopped and questioned, Andre was apparently buying baby food, and he was immediately brought in for questioning, but soon released for lack of evidence.
Which that little tidbit of information alone is creepy to me.
The baby food?
Why the fuck is he buying baby food?
Right?
He doesn't have a baby.
Is it just like...
Does he just eat it?
Yeah,
or is he feeding it to somebody
something?
he's
right
holding captive?
Yeah. Could be more ominous.
I mean, this guy is just, creep even to look at.
Yeah. It was also discovered that he had worked as an orderly, custodian, and physical therapy aide at Willowbrook State School for a few years, and he had lived in various shacks and tunnels surrounding the institution. He soon became NYPD's #1 suspect. And as they looked deeper into his past, he had a colossal criminal record, and police wondered if Andre wasn't just a one-time kidnapper, but possibly a serial killer who had been murdering children under the radar for over a decade.
So let's talk a little bit more about who is Andre Rand. Well, he was actually born Frank Rostam Rushan on March 11, 1944, and he had one sister. His mother suffered from mental and emotional problems, but according to Andre's sister, they were not abused as children. Because in the documentary, he was actually able to go and track down his sister and asked her point blank, he's like, did anything happen to you guys? Like in your childhood? She's like, no, everything, we were never abused. Like, again, maybe she was just saying that because she was kind of put on the spot in front of the camera. But according to her, they were not abused, which is always interesting. So,
and she was also very adamant on like defending her brother.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, maybe you've been misinformed by the media or something. She said something along those lines.
Well, and she also said that he's manipulating you.
Was that
because they started trying to write him in prison later on, but yeah, she said something along the line, he's manipulating you or something like that.
Oh shit, okay.
Yeah, which is pretty wild. But their father died on March 27th, 1958, only a few weeks after Andre's 14th birthday. According to Andre, his mother had been institutionalized at Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York, with the population sometimes reaching 13,000 people. This was once the largest psychiatric institution in the world. He and his sister would visit their mother as often as they could. Andre then served in the U.S. military for a few years. Between 1966 and 1968, he went by the name Frank Bruchette, and he found work at Willowbrook. It just shows the background checks they don't do at Willowbrook. If has a different name and he's got, a background. But many who knew him described him as funny, articulate, and well-read. And at some point during his employment, he began living in a makeshift shelter in the forest at the edge of the institute. This is also when his long list of run-ins with the law began. On May 5th, 1969, he was arrested in South Bronx for kidnapping and attempting to rape a 9-year-old girl. He had allegedly lured her into his car, drove to a vacant lot, removed her clothes, and then removed his own. But a passing police cruiser spotted him and quickly placed him under arrest. The child was then driven home, which thank God that officer just happened to see this. He denied the crime, but he was ultimately charged with attempted rape, and he later pled guilty to sexual abuse and was sentenced to 4 years. He only served 16 months before being released on parole in January of 1972. This is when he tried to erase his past by legally changing his name to Andre Rand. But the name change wouldn't matter. He'd be arrested 3 more times over the next 8 years for minor offenses, including burglary. In 1979, he was accused of raping a young woman and a 15-year-old girl, but neither pressed charges. In a bizarre case in 1983, Andre was driving a school bus and picked up a group of 11 children from a Staten Island YMCA. He then purchased a meal for them without the consent of any of their parents and then took them to the Newark Liberty International Airport. None of the children were physically harmed, but Andre was apprehended and served 10 months in jail for unlawful imprisonment.
Isn't that a bizarre
What the
case?
hell was he doing?
Right? Was it just to prove that he could? He's like, oh, it's so easy to just do something like this? I don't even know.
Or did he have a plan? What would your plan be?
Yeah, maybe he thought he was going to do something else, but then second guessed himself, so he decided not to go through with it.
I mean, this just that incident alone just kind of paints, what's going on with this guy and what his mind state is. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And is he extremely dumb or is he extremely smart? I think is a big question too. Meanwhile, Jennifer's body was still missing, and some proposed the theory that Andre was working with someone who was moving victims through those subterranean tunnels beneath Willowbrook at night. But police warned volunteers to stay away from Willowbrook as it was deemed unsafe. The community was desperate to find Jennifer, so they ignored the warning. Eventually, a former firefighter named George Kramer snuck past security where he dug into soil with disturbed dirt and clay that he had actually found several days earlier, and it looked like it had been recently been shoveled. And as he dug into the soil, the smell of death hit him. And we actually have some old news coverage of this discovery. We'll play it now.
It was a place they had checked before, turning up nothing. But when a retired fireman returned just before 8 p.m. last night, he dug into the mound of dirt he had noticed last Saturday near Building 27 and discovered flesh, then a hand and foot. Medical examiner Elliot Gross made the finding official at 2 a.m.
We have a body of short stature that was covered with dirt and is going to have to be examined tomorrow.
As soon as the body was removed by ambulance at 3 a.m., the testing began to determine if this was indeed Jennifer Schweiger, the 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome who disappeared 5 weeks ago, last seen walking hand in hand with a local drifter. Last week, police arrested 43-year-old Andre Rand, a convicted child sex offender, and charged him with kidnapping Jennifer. Now they want to know if Rand is connected to the disappearance of other Staten Island girls, and whether any more bodies are buried on the old Willowbrook grounds.
There may be other bodies there. We don't know.
So at the point that Jennifer's body was found, they had already been searching for 35 days. And obviously when they located her remains, as you just heard, they extracted the body, disturbing it as little as possible, with the body still mostly encased in dirt. A relative of the Schweigers, Betty J. Fleming, read a statement after the discovery. She said, "The past 5 weeks have been extremely difficult ones for the family. They want to express their sincerest appreciation to everyone who has offered assistance, and especially to the hundreds of volunteers who have been searching and praying for such a long time." Jennifer had been buried naked in the shallow grave just behind one of the abandoned buildings of Willowbrook. As you heard, about 100 to 150 feet away from where Andre was known to sleep at night. Forensic experts, with the help of dental records, x-rays, and fingerprints, confirmed the identity of the body, and whether the body was moved and reburied is up for debate. Detectives who originally worked the case claimed that Jennifer was discovered buried with her head down, but there was evidence of blood pooling in the feet, and this suggested she might have died and was originally positioned with her feet in a lower position and then moved. Even detectives believe there might have been some others besides Andre involved in the crime. Some locals believe the body was moved post-mortem, closer to Andre's campsite so they could frame him, and as for the cause of death for Jennifer, it was determined to be asphyxia. But the medical examiner could not determine what was the cause of asphyxiation. The body was badly decomposed and there were no signs of strangulation. Jennifer had no broken bones or lacerations either, so exactly how she was murdered is still a mystery. Regardless, Andre Rand had already been arrested a week before the body's discovery and ordered to undergo a 30-day psychiatric evaluation. He was first charged with kidnapping and later first-degree murder. The NYPD had performed 4 weeks of surveillance on Andre before they arrested him. He had lived with Reverend Charles Musket at the request of the police. They bugged his room and set up a surveillance unit in a vehicle just outside day and night. And according to Reverend Musket, Andre confided in him and admitted to kidnapping Jennifer. He said he thought her family didn't want her and that she was alone. He then allegedly told the Reverend that people with mental handicaps shouldn't be alive. So police considered the motive that perhaps Andre believed he was killing as some form of eugenics, and this concerned the Reverend because he had an intellectually disabled son of his own. In a later interview, he admitted that he believed Andre was demonized and possessed, which I can totally see why he would think that.
Yeah.
So there you have somebody who claims that he literally confessed to at least kidnapping Jennifer.
Right.
Whether or not he murdered her, I guess that's not really clear at this point. But
yeah, he did not confess to murdering her, but he did confess to the kidnapping.
But if he's kidnapping her, then where is he taking her? And then who's in subsequently murdering these children or Jennifer?
Yeah. And the other thing is I'm could not confirm that this was even ever caught on audio.
Right.
This is just coming from the Reverend saying that, which is worth noting. But after his arrest, the public wondered if Andre was unfairly targeted. Newspapers were pretty quick to call him a number of different names. One was Drifter, a sicko, the boogeyman, a monster, the Pied Piper, and even a, quote, Hannibal Lecter sex perv. So quickly throwing him under the bus. Also, the Hannibal Lecter sex perv doesn't even really track. They're just using derogatory words in this case.
Well, the media loves to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, especially back then, they'd go to the most like sensational title possible.
Exactly.
That's going to get people's attention and buy their newspaper.
Yep.
Without backing it up with evidence. But
yeah. So rumors later spread that he would go and dig up dead bodies of children from cemeteries and then have intercourse with them. Other rumors spread saying he sold the bodies to occultists who wanted to perform violent blood rituals. So we'll remember that. We'll get into this a little bit later. But from a famous photo where he was seen drooling and from the video footage of him being placed in a squad car and acting deranged, many began wondering if police had simply pinned the crimes on a homeless mentally ill man with a criminal record. He was an outcast in the eyes of the community who also happened to live in a shanty near Willowbrook. Some theorized that Andre could have been involved in Jennifer's disappearance, but even if he was, there was speculation that he didn't work alone. There might have been an underground network of criminals living in and around Willowbrook that could have contributed to the crimes. And Detective Leonard D'Alessandro later said, quote, "I think he was passing the children around to his friends who were just as sick as him." Meanwhile, 40 police officers, trained dogs, and digging equipment were brought to the former Willowbrook State School to try to find more evidence in either the Jennifer Schweiger case or the countless others who had gone missing on Staten Island in previous years. Unfortunately, a search of the area did not find any of Jennifer's clothes or personal items. The NYPD also claimed they believe Andre was also a possible suspect in the disappearance of Thais Jackson, who disappeared in 1983, and Holly Ann Hughes, who went missing in 1981, and we will come back to these cases a bit later. Detectives defended their arrest, believing Andre was their prime suspect, and they also speculated that Andre might have been a Satanist or a devil worshiper who kidnapped children and provided them to occultists for blood sacrifices. Keep in mind this case, as we mentioned, was also around the height of the satanic panic.
So this was thrown around a lot.
Yes.
And all this did was feed into the paranoia and fear that people were already experiencing from the media.
Exactly. It's a great headline, right?
Yeah. And they don't have any evidence to back this up, but you know, they're kind of just hopping on with all the other rumors and you know what the media is spinning. So,
and these rumors came from, there were these anonymous letters that were sent to Jennifer's family claiming that Andre had been supplying children to a, quote, satanic black mass. It was known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which we talked about earlier. This was the same cult that David Berkowitz claimed helped him commit the Son of Sam murders in the 1970s. And this was also the cult that was rumored to be connected with the Manson murderers, but this was also never proven. These letters of caution about Andre and devil worshipping were eventually traced back to a local ultra-religious cult, paranoid of devil worshippers. No evidence has ever connected Andre Rand to any sort of devil worshipping community or occult activity. This was all just media hype and paranoia and fear. Police told the public that witnesses had seen Andre with Jennifer on the day of her disappearance, but this would also become a serious problem with the prosecution's murder case because it's incredibly hard to convict someone of murder with only eyewitness testimony. Prosecutors had no physical evidence tying Andre to the murder. So for his trial, they relied almost entirely on eyewitness testimony from 10 witnesses mostly. 9 of the 10 confirmed they had specifically seen Andre with Jennifer on the day of her disappearance, but this would not be enough for conviction. In 1988, his murder trial ended in a deadlocked jury. In October of that year, the judge dismissed the murder charge under the law that Andre could not be tried again for the same charge, but he was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, making him eligible for parole in 2008 as long as he wasn't convicted of another crime.
Which that says so much to me, because to get 25 years to life for a kidnapping, from what I've seen out there is like that's like the max that you could a judge could hand down for a sentence for that charge. And it's very clear that like the last thing they wanted to do was, not hit him as hard as they possibly can.
Go,
because, everybody's in sheer panic at this point and scared.
Right.
But again, they don't even know for sure if they have the right guy or not, which is crazy to me that, it seems like they got tunnel vision on him and they just were like, we need to find any shred of evidence or circumstantial evidence to convict this guy. But I really wonder if I assume they did to some extent of like look into some of the rumors and like, was there possibly other people? But it's crazy to think that there is no other evidence found. Like that's nuts. Like he's just out there in the woods and he managed to hide absolutely every trace of evidence for the not only the kidnapping, the murder, how he murdered them, or if he was assisted in some way, where are those people? They just disappeared. Like none of it makes any sense.
Right. So considering that, they could hit him with another crime, potentially another charge, they looked into Andre's history and they potentially connected him to several more suspected victims throughout the years, beginning back in 1972.
Wow.
And at one point, up to 30 different cases were considered. And if they could convict him of another kidnapping or possible murder, they could potentially keep Andre in prison for life. So this is what they were going for. And in the end, 4 unsolved missing person cases around Staten Island stood out. 3 of the 4 involved children. And now that Andre Rand was a suspect in these disappearances, locals no longer had to rely on this old folktale, Cropsey. This was just a real
Andre
man.
Rand is Cropsey.
Yeah, he embodied this folktale.
Which I'm sure having an urban legend that kind of, in a roundabout way, turns out to be real did not help this case whatsoever.
No, right? Because it's already kind of planted in people's minds, right? So the first potential case we'll look at was a case back in 1972, a few months after Andre had been granted parole and changed his name. July 7th of that year, 5-year-old Alice Pereira vanished from the area surrounding the Tysons Lane apartments in the 600 block of Tysons Lane on Staten Island. She had lived under the care of her 26-year-old mother who had MS, and her mother had been separated from her father for about 3 years. So on the day of Alice's disappearance, she had been playing in the building's lobby with her brother before he left her alone for a short moment, and this is when she suddenly disappeared around 3:30 in the afternoon. She then might have been seen in a park close to the apartment complex in the island's New Dorp neighborhood, and her parents reported her missing at 6:15 p.m. Detectives discovered her parents had been separated, and the first suspect was immediately her father, but he was soon cleared as a suspect. They discovered Andre Rand had worked as a painter and general maintenance man in the Tysons Lane apartment building at the time of Alice's disappearance, but he was never charged with her kidnapping. Alice was never seen or heard from again.
That's surprising to me, especially since they're using similar types of evidence to pin, kidnapping charges on him for the other victims. That's like their strongest piece of evidence, I feel, is that he either worked at the location of where this child was last seen, or he lived nearby or was seen in the area by witnesses or something like that. But yeah, that's crazy to me. So we still don't know what happened to Alice, but another potential victim of Andre's was 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes. She was last seen around 9:30 p.m. on July 15th, 1981 on Staten Island near Richmond Terrace and Park Avenue. She was seen buying a bar of soap over at the Port Richmond Deli 2 blocks away from her home, and she was a nickel short. Her father, Peter, described Holly Ann as friendly, outgoing, and adorable. Her family had also described her as a streetwise little girl who could take care of herself. But she never returned home that day after going to the Port Richmond Deli, and she was never seen or heard from again. A month after her disappearance, her mother, Holly Cedarholm, received a mysterious phone call from a man who identified himself as Sal. The man told her he was holding her daughter captive, and the only way she could get her back safely was to meet him and perform sex acts on him. Holly Cedarholm then contacted detectives who secretly escorted her to the meeting location, Penn Station, with Sal, but he never showed up. Regardless, she never believed the man had her daughter. By that time, she had already accepted that Holly Ann was most likely deceased. Her father, Peter, also described odd anonymous phone calls he had been receiving as well, which I feel like this happened a lot. And it still happens today in cases, but I feel like
just trolls.
Yeah, it's just so fucked up that people would try to take advantage of these poor parents who have just, their daughter's missing. They have no idea where she is, and they're trying to exploit them and get something from them.
Right.
In the following months, Holly Ann's parents criticized the police for allegedly botching the investigation. According to them, police disregarded several witnesses who claimed they had seen Holly Ann only because the witnesses had criminal records or substance abuse problems. Investigators denied any misconduct in the case, but you can kind of, make your own assumptions there, I feel like. Authorities questioned Andre Rand and searched his vehicle shortly after Holly Ann disappeared, but found nothing. Allegedly, eyewitnesses had seen his green Volkswagen circling the area of the store where Holly Ann disappeared. Others even claimed they saw Holly Ann inside of his vehicle. Acquaintances of Andre confirmed he often drove the same green Volkswagen Beetle and parked it near Willowbrook. So another case, which we mentioned earlier that stood out, was the disappearance of Thais Jackson on August 14, 1983. This was only 12 days after Andre had been released from prison for the kidnapping of the 11 children on the school bus, and 4 years before Jennifer was murdered. Thais was a 10-year-old girl with learning disabilities. She also had diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, and Bright's disease, which is a kidney disorder that requires medication and treatment. She was last seen leaving the Mariners Harbor Motel on Forest Avenue in Staten Island. After her family's apartment caught fire, burning her left wrist and elbow, they all moved into the motel, and they soon planned to move to the southern United States. Her family described Thais as streetwise and wary of strangers. She always went on errands in the city, sometimes with her sister or a friend. Other times she was confident enough to go alone. Her family had always taught her to be wary of predators. At 1:30 p.m. the day she disappeared, Thais' mother was asleep in the motel room. Depending on the source of information, either her mother or another resident sent Thais out to buy some chicken wings from the Crown Supermarket in the 900 block of Richmond Avenue. According to witnesses, she was last seen talking to an older man, possibly Andre. She never returned to her family's motel room and was never seen or heard from again. Her mother woke up at 4:30 p.m. and discovered her daughter had been missing for nearly 3 hours, and that's when she immediately contacted the police and reported her missing. Obviously, the police looked at her mother and uncle, but they both passed the police's lie detector test and were cleared as suspects. And apparently at this time, Andre Rand had a campsite at the Baron Hirsch Cemetery, less than half a mile from the Mariners Harbor Motel. And Thais' mother said she had seen a man matching his description loitering in the motel's parking lot. Andre was questioned by police, but they did not charge him for lack of evidence, so he was set free. And that leads us to another case that detectives have connected to Andre Rand, with the disappearance of 22-year-old Henry Gafforia, who also went by Hank. It's been reported that Hank had a low IQ somewhere in the 70s, and he had gone out drinking on June 8, 1984. The first thing he did is he went to Mugs Away, but they denied him service, and then he went to a Spa Lounge pub in the Port Richmond neighborhood and stayed there until close, sometime around 4 a.m. Allegedly, eyewitnesses claimed he was last seen there talking with Andre Rand, and after leaving the pub, Hank was never seen or heard from again. He was reported missing 7 p.m. later that day, and Hank's body has never been found. Police discovered that Hank had lived with his parents and 3 brothers in the 90 block of Heberton Avenue. This was the same block where Andre Rand had lived for a time and just around the corner from Holly Ann Hughes' residence. And some noticed that Hank could be seen in the background of video news reports when Holly Ann went missing, not long before his own disappearance. While Andre was in prison for the kidnapping charges, officers and fellow inmates claimed that they had overheard Andre bragging about his pedophilic tendencies. He also allegedly confessed to Holly Ann Hughes' murder to a fellow inmate and even compared himself to the serial killer Ted Bundy. Officials then searched the yard of Andre's former Vreeland Street residence in Staten Island in January 2002, but no evidence related to the Holly Ann's case was discovered. So still, I can't believe they can't find anything.
Right. And I have heard that confessions in prison are fairly unreliable.
Oh, yeah.
People talk a big game. It's like, depending on who you're talking to, you can just
just to other inmates,
shit.
just to seem like they're
like, I'm crazy. I'm like
scarier
Ted Bundy.
than right. Or they'll do it to try to get like a deal, like work a deal.
Right. True. Yeah.
But we've seen people lie, and make shit up just to get, a lesser sentence or something like that.
Definitely.
So it's very, very difficult to even know if they're telling the truth or not.
Yeah. So by 2004, Andre was charged with the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes and brought to trial. There is no statute of limitations in New York for first-degree kidnapping. Otherwise, this trial might have never happened. So Andre's defense obviously maintained his innocence, and witnesses who claimed to have seen Holly Ann in Andre's car were brought forward, but the defense claimed that the eyewitnesses were either lying outright or mistaken. Andre's lawyer said in an interview that William L. Murphy, the Staten Island district attorney, was about to retire, and many believe that he had put pressure on finding a suspect he could just pin all the Staten Island disappearances on, which I can buy that theory. In a later interview, DA William Murphy said that some of the witnesses in the kidnapping cases were alcoholics at the time of the disappearances, but he said, quote, in recovery, their memories were improved. What? So you remember how Holly Ann's parents were like, oh, you've discredited all these witnesses because they have criminal records or they have substance abuse problems. But now all of a sudden, years and years later, we're like, no. Those people got clean now, and somehow their memories are even better. So we can trust these witnesses.
Which I feel like is completely scientifically wrong.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You don't just get sober and your memory returns.
It's better.
Yeah. No. It's like that memory is damaged. So,
well, it all just seems too convenient.
Right.
He's trying to leave office, and he's like, oh, this would be a great way to go out if I can, wrap this case up.
Yeah, because I don't want to have a stain on my record that I left all these cases unsolved, especially these children who went missing. So, according to detectives, Andre allegedly admitted to playing a game of hide and seek with Holly Ann on the day of her disappearance, and to giving her money to buy soap because she was, quote, very, very dirty, but said he left her before she disappeared. This was in the original questioning way back when Holly Ann originally disappeared. But Andre's defense claimed this statement was invented by the detective who questioned him, and he denied ever meeting Holly Ann Hughes. His lawyers attempted to throw suspicion on the child's family as well. The defense emphasized that Holly Ann had been in the middle of a custody dispute between her parents and had been taken by both of them at one time or another. But the prosecution reminded the jury that the police ruled out both parents soon after her 1981 disappearance. Holly Ann's mother, Holly Cedarholm, identified Andre Rand's voice as the same voice she heard during the extortion phone call from the mysterious man who had identified himself as Sal all those years ago. According to witnesses on the prison bus that transported Andre to and from prison, he consistently claimed he was innocent. This is fascinating. One of the corrections officers was overheard responding, quote, then consider yourself a martyr for the safety of children. That's what you are. So, doesn't matter if you did it or not, bud. You're just a martyr. We're scapegoating you. And
which is there truth to that statement, or is that just like what that, prison, correctional officer's perspective was on him?
Yeah. I mean, I can see like,
does he know about all these other like jailhouse confessions being made to other inmates? Does he know the case at all?
And I do see it as like, okay, I could see the local community being so frustrated with not having anyone to pin these crimes on. So it's like the sentiment might just be like, yeah, you are a martyr. Even if we know logically that maybe you didn't murder these kids, we kind of feel that you did. So we're throwing you under the bus.
Well, it seems to me like he's involved in some way or another.
Yeah.
Whether it's the murder is one thing, but at least in other ways, it seems like he's likely connected to it.
And definitely just a menace overall from his criminal record.
really a guy you don't want free on the streets, period.
Yeah.
But
so in a wild turn of events, on the third week of the trial, a key witness kind of came out of nowhere, Tanya Goodson. She took the stand, and she would end up changing the course of the trial. Tanya was allegedly Holly Ann's really good friend back when they were children, and Tanya claimed she had been with Holly Ann on the day of her disappearance. She claimed Andre pulled up beside them in his green car. He was wearing a Halloween mask, completely covering his face. He asked if they wanted candy and opened his car door. Holly Ann then got inside, and that was the last Tanya had ever seen of her. Many have wondered why her testimony was not discovered or brought forward to police 2 decades earlier when Holly Ann had first disappeared. That seems a bit strange.
That's really tough to, because like, is this, did she really like remember this later on? Perhaps.
Right, yeah.
Maybe it's just like a memory that like came back to her, way, way later on, or did just nobody go and ask her about this like at the time?
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
I think the one big takeaway from this, and this is based on other cases going on at this time period, the NYPD was just terrible, like just terrible in like the 70s and 80s, especially even when talking about the Son of Sam case. It is just bad. Like they just had no idea what they were doing with cases like this.
Yeah. Because either that is we're looking at some level of deceit, corruption possibly.
Right. It's possible.
Or we're looking at someone completely overlooking, questioning Holly Ann's really good friend that she was possibly with when she disappeared. So both scenarios are terrible to me.
Yeah. And I think the difficult part is like, we don't know, like, what is the extent of the investigation that was done in any of these disappearances.
Right.
And from looking at, if you look at the disappearances by themselves, it's like, other than like physically walking around the area that they went missing in, or the area that, that Andre Rand was living in, I'm like, what other investigation was done? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who are the other persons of interest? Who are the other possible suspects? Like, we don't know any of that information. We don't know if they were considering anybody else, or they tried to track down, like, who is Andre friends with?
Right.
Like, did he just live all alone 24/7?
Doubt it.
He worked jobs, so who else knew him? You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, how far, like, did they build out the full web of like all of the contacts that Andre Rand had? Or did they just get such tunnel vision that they were like, there's no other possibilities that can even be considered here. It's only this guy. He's got the criminal record to back it up. So we're not even going to entertain anything else or investigate any other leads. And because this was such a big case and such a massive like media storm that surrounded it, that you have to know that they were getting bombarded with thousands and thousands and thousands of tips. Did they actually go through those tips? Did they follow up on those leads? Or were they so laser focused on putting Andre Rand away for good that they missed something?
Yeah, I could see where it would be like, okay, even if we have other suspects, where can we even get a conviction? Because we can't even get a conviction. They couldn't even get a murder conviction on Andre Rand, who was their guy. Right. So they're probably just like, we're screwed.
We'd rather get somebody behind bars than nobody behind bars, and have these all be unsolved.
Right.
And I think that's it. In some way it's good because it appeases the public. It helps make people feel better knowing that we've got this dangerous guy off the street. We believe he's responsible for these things. But part of me is like, I'd want to see like, what's the evidence? Like, what's the hard evidence? How do you know for certain that this is the guy? How do we know there's not a whole bunch of them? A whole bunch of members of this group, There's rumors that he's passing around these victims to other people. Well, what about those guys? Those guys sound just as dangerous, if not more dangerous in some circumstances. Like, who are those? Like,
right.
And it's just crazy to me to think that nothing else was found. I just can't accept that there was nothing.
Like, you couldn't find anything in his car, in the homes that he was.
Who was he talking to?
In. There was nothing in his shanty that was nearby.
And again, this is like pre-DNA. So
right. But like they didn't even find traces of blood or anything, or like a murder weapon. They don't even know how these victims were killed. They only found one remain of one of the victims. Like,
no, but did they go and talk to people who saw Andre Rand's car move spots or go somewhere? Did he stop and get gas somewhere? You know what I mean? Like all these questions are coming in, and it just seems like there's no answers there. And it's like either all that information is there, it's just, in a file box somewhere.
Right, yeah.
Which I know there's tons and tons of files for this particular case with Andre Rand, but it just doesn't seem like a good enough explanation to really make me feel confident, right? That this is the one and only guy.
Especially if you're going to convince a jury, right? It's like, what do we have here? So we have her childhood friend where she's seeing him in his car, in his Volkswagen, but he has a mask on. So we can't even confirm.
How is she able to verify that that's even Andre if he's wearing a mask?
Exactly. We can't. Then 2, we've connected his voice to the voice of the like troll caller, the extortion caller way back. And we have placed him with like eyewitnesses that he's around the area, right? We know that. But like, man,
how do we know there's not another ex staff member of Willowbrook that's doing this? I mean, that place was fucking horrific.
Right.
I mean, it is absolute crime the way that they were treating the people and children that were living there. It's absolutely insane. So it's like, how do we know there's not some sicko doctor that's doing these things? I mean, to me, it seems like this is such a bigger,
it's huge, and
bigger web here.
It just has so many blank spots in it. It's very frustrating, but
which draws so many parallels to the Son of Sam case. It's crazy. They fucked that one up too.
Yeah.
Anyways,
so after that testimony, later that day, this was actually in the Cropsey documentary, they had asked Andre what he had to say to the Staten Island community. And he said, quote, "They're perpetrators of a fraud." And in a letter to documentary filmmakers, he wrote, quote, "Evilness sells, and that's the name of their game." Which again, keep in mind, even his sister was apparently claiming that he was super manipulative and that he was possibly manipulating the filmmakers themselves.
Well, and I think it's also important to, I think, and there are some opinions about his intelligence level, there's that picture of him drooling and stuff is like, there's a lot of debate around, is this guy, intellectually smart, or is he like, potentially mentally, handicapped in some way, or
right.
And I hope that's the right term. I know the terms are constantly changing, so apologize in advance if we aren't using the most up-to-date terms on these things. But
and I know it was like in those early arrest videos, he's seen like he looks kind of deranged,
out of it,
like the drooling and stuff, which I mean that could be who knows what that is. That could be he's mentally ill or etc. But
substance even. I mean,
true. He could be high, right? And I don't know, from that where he was, they're perpetrators of a fraud. That's a pretty eloquent statement to say. Just that syntax and vocab. I wouldn't expect him to be. I don't know. Also, his letters that he wrote, even though it's very rambling, it seems like he has some level of being able to read and write.
Well, and he was very careful about the way that he corresponded through letters as well. And he wanted to do everything like by the book, so to speak, through his attorneys and stuff. He actually had like a competent defense team.
Because he did not like do interviews.
No,
he was like, my lawyers can handle this.
He never took the stand or anything like that. He's very hush hush. Even when they would move him, from the prison to the courthouse and stuff, he would not say anything to anybody. He just head down.
That's
quiet.
Why in the documentary, it was surprising to hear him speak and like respond to a question. I didn't expect that at all.
I mean, I think I think he's more intelligent than he tries to lead on with. And I think also just going back to the fact that there's no physical evidence left behind. You know, how did he kidnap them? Did he, bound and gag them? Like, how did he actually, they haven't even figured that out. Like, how did he even do it? Because, I mean,
how did he do it?
Any of these people that would have been kidnapped would have been big enough to, put up some type of fight or struggle. And like, how did he deal with that on his own? There would have been something to aid him with that.
Right.
Especially if he's driving them somewhere.
And typically we find like, oh, there was like some hair in his back seat,
right.
Or there were fibers of a rope that, had kind of the sign of a struggle or like anything like that, but just nothing. We have nothing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's assuming the police actually searched for all these things.
Yeah.
And that's the tough thing too, is we just don't know. I mean, they could have absolutely sucked and didn't do any of these things because they were just like in a, so panicked to try to find the person that they forgot to do, the forensic investigation. But let's assume they did. That's crazier to me, the fact that there's nothing.
Yeah.
It's either where's the clothing?
It's either he didn't do it or he was very good at covering it.
Yeah, disposing of all the evidence.
Yeah.
So how do you know how to do that?
Yeah.
And where is it? Did he bury it? Like, that's what's crazy. It's just, there's nothing.
And I mean, if you circle back to Staten Island being a dumping ground where, bodies are dumped wherever.
Right.
That could
Maybe he knew exactly where to take the stuff where it'd never be seen again.
Right. So by the end of the trial in October 2004, 23 years after Holly Ann's disappearance, Andre Rand was convicted of kidnapping. He was never charged with murder due to an obvious lack of evidence. The judge sentenced him to another 25 years to life in prison, the same as his first sentence for Jennifer Schweiger's kidnapping. And this second sentence makes it extremely unlikely that he will ever be released from prison. During his sentencing, Andre Rand wrote a rambling half-hour monologue. I don't really want to give him a voice, but to sum it up, he denied his guilt. He professed his love for older and lonely women, and he also invited the female jurors to correspond with him, which is odd. In a strange letter in 2011, he also sarcastically wished a happy Mother's Day to, quote, all the ladies on Staten Island who supported prosecutorial vindictiveness against an innocent person. Very odd.
So to this day, Andre maintains his innocence in all crimes suspected of him. He'll become eligible for parole in 2037 when he'll be 93 years old, so chances are he'll most likely die in prison.
Yeah.
In an interview, Holly Ann's father, Peter, said, I don't feel like I got closure at all. You never get closure. That's just a bullshit word. It happened and that's it. You got to live with it. You have no choice. When Holly Ann's mother, Holly Cedarholm, was asked about the conviction, she said, it's not going to bring back Holly. You know that, but she's watching. All the other potential victims who we mentioned that disappeared from the Staten Island area are still missing to this day, which we'll put links to their information. And if there, anybody out there has information regarding these cases, you can contact the New York Police Department at 646-610-6914. And we'll have their information listed below. It's all from the charlieproject.org website, has all their information and descriptions.
And we can add some those age progression photos as well.
Yeah, from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children played a big part in all of these cases in age progressing the victims that are still missing. I'm going to go ahead and play a clip of Donna Coutinho from Friends of Jennifer, which was an organization that was set up. We're not sure if it's still active today to help look for Jennifer Schweiger, but also other missing children, talking about the Holly Ann case and finding the remains and what that was like.
So after Jennifer was found and the police were there and emergency services came, and after maybe an hour or two, they started taking us out slowly. I was in a police car and I was coming out the front entrance of what's now the College of Staten Island. And next thing I know, someone's banging on the window, Donna, Donna. And I rolled down the window and it was Holly Ann's aunt, Patty. And she said to me, did they find Holly? Is she in there too? Is Holly in there too? And she was just so desperate. I felt so bad for her. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we never give up. they want to know. They have to have some kind of closure. It was just such a sad experience. I think the goal of the Friends of Jennifer was to give the families closure. It cannot be an easy thing to go 20, 30 years and never know where that child is, at least to give it a proper burial, to have some kind of closure. Holly Ann has a brother who was a police officer. It had to be very difficult for him when we went to trial to relive that whole experience, her mother, her father, and we wish we could have spared them some of that.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine what it'd be like to not know where your daughter is for 30 plus years. I mean, I've often heard victims of missing children, missing people say that it's far worse for them to not know where their child is than to know that they are deceased and know somewhat of what happened to them. But to just live each day having no clue whatsoever of where they are, what happened to them is the absolute worst pain to live through. But retired detective Frank Saez, an expert in cold cases in New York City's missing children, believes the victims are still buried somewhere in Staten Island. Some believe this is all a game for Andre, and since he likes to be the center of attention, clearly, perhaps during his incarceration at some point, he'll open up about where the bodies are buried, and some are even hoping for a deathbed confession. To this day, local volunteers will search the forest and abandoned buildings of Willowbrook about twice a year, hoping to find any trace of the missing victims. And for those unconvinced that Andre Rand is the real-life Staten Island Cropsey, it's very, very possible that the actual killer or killers might still be out there uncaught, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And honestly, a real possibility. Like I kept mentioning earlier, this, Andre Rand's case reminds me a lot of David Berkowitz, and they actually were in prison together at one point, amongst some other serial killers as well. And, in the David Berkowitz case, there is so much evidence to suggest that there was more than one shooter.
Right.
And, David Berkowitz kind of was the fall guy for all of those shootings. And, there was even evidence to suggest that he was way the hell over here, and how could he have been over on, in this borough when this shooting happened. So it's like, it seems to me like the NYPD either just wasn't equipped, didn't have the resources. I don't know what it was exactly during this time period, but they just missed a lot of things, and a lot of unsolved crime went on. And, because it's a major city, right? It's a major metropolitan, the fear, the paranoia, the media is going to be 100 times worse. So when something like this happens, especially, and this is true, I think, in today's terms as well. I mean, the one case recently that keeps coming up, which I think we talked about a little while ago, I think in our Smiley Face Killer episode, is the, this potential of a serial killer in Austin right now. Bodies are continuing to show up near, I want to say, a waterfront bar there. Don't quote me on that, but serial killers getting thrown around, and the authorities are like adequately trying to debunk it, trying to say, no, there's no serial killer, because once serial killer gets put out there, it kind of sends everybody into a tailspin. Yeah, everybody's like, holy shit, there's an uncaught serial killer. What are you guys doing? And then it puts this immense pressure on law enforcement to figure out who this person is. And I think in the Son of Sam case, and even in Andre Rand's case, was he responsible for murdering one of these children? It's very possible, right? It's very possible. I think based on the circumstantial evidence, and also his criminal history, I think it's very likely that he may have murdered one of these children. But is he the only one? And the fact that they got so tunnel vision with him and kind of assumed at the end of the day that he was a serial killer and that he's responsible for all these children is wild to me, because it's very, very possible there is somebody uncaught.
I agree.
Still out there.
Yeah.
And even with the Son of Sam case, there's clearly most likely others involved with that whole case as well that have never been caught.
Yeah.
And, you know, the process church of final judgment, I mean, that's a whole other rabbit hole you can go
Yeah.
down. Because again, like in this, you know, we didn't talk about it quite as much as it really was during this time period, but like
Mhm.
the devil worshiping angle and theory was like so rampant, and people really, really believe that these children were being abducted to and then handed off to these devil worshipers or these cults that were, you know, doing sacrifices and blood rituals and stuff. But that whole angle is very, very interesting to me. You know, a lot of people would argue that a lot of those theories have been debunked because there's been no evidence to back it up. And even some of the groups are like, no, we would never do that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
And the fact that that rumor really all started from this ultra religious group is like, I don't know. It doesn't give, I can't believe that, because it's like, yeah, of course you're the most paranoid about these devil worshippers that are like digging up children's bodies or abducting children and giving them to some occult ritual. Like, because that's kind of the fantasy that you guys are playing into, that there's this ultimate war of like Satan and God. And I'm just like, I don't think I think reality is more nuanced than that. I think it's much harder to parse through what's actually going on here. Even with serial killers, I think the scary reality that I believe in is that most serial killers will just be completely elusive and might never be caught, especially nowadays. Like, I remember our old serial killer episode we did, I think last year, where a lot of them can be truckers. It's not like old school serial killers where they're in LA. It's like the Golden State Killer. You know, he's like in one area killing all these people. I don't think it's like that anymore.
They're more transient.
Yeah, you're crossing state lines. You're dumping bodies of, you know, disenfranchised or disillusioned people that, you know, like police don't look at. And I think it's just hard to put your finger down. We love the concept of a boogeyman. And Cropsey embodies that boogeyman. And so Andre Rand, therefore,
fits that description to a T.
And it's easy to just be like, it's him. He has this disturbing criminal record. He is a menace. We know this. So it's him. And it's the book's closed, right? But I think the reality of this case is much darker and much more elusive. And we might just never know.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I don't think we'll fortunately ever know the complete truth to this, because even if he does come out and like makes this big confession, how do you trust it?
Yeah, he would have to identify where he dumped the bodies.
To give exact locations and lead people to all of the missing missing children and find their remains.
We have seen cases
which is
like
possible.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was the what was it, Fred and Rose West case? I think they were pulled out of prison and they were identifying where bodies were. Yep. So like, it can still happen. And I mean, I hope for the sake of the victims' families, to just have those remains and put their children to rest would be nice. But man, I don't know.
Yeah, this one's terrifying though. I mean, there's just no way to know, you know, 100% what really happened. And is Andre alone in this? I think there's a good possibility that there's other people that were involved in these disappearances and potentially murders as well that are just uncaught or just never popped up on police's radar.
Yeah.
Or never looked at. Because, you know, a lot of people make the comment that this would be a lot for him to do all on his own without leaving any trace of evidence, you know?
Right.
And what is it possible he had like a group going and he was only responsible for the kidnapping portion of it, and then he handed them off to somebody else, and then who knows where they went from there? I think Jennifer is the most convincing to me, her case, because she was ultimately found very close to one of his encampments. And I mean, I think that's at least something. But again, it's no way to prove that it was actually him that put her there.
Right. And there was also the evidence where there was the blood pooling in the feet, which suggests that she may have been moved at some point. Right. So it's like, man, we don't even know how she died too. It's like there's just such little evidence to connect the dots in this case.
I think to me the underlying factor here is just incompetent
Yeah, I agree.
police work, unfortunately. Like, and not saying that everybody in NYPD is incompetent. Doesn't. No, I think there's probably a lot of great detectives, but again, like in investigations like this, you've got multiple layers here. You've got the patrol officers that are showing up to the family's home for the missing persons report to gather statements. You know, so it's such a, and it's, I mean, the NYPD is such a massive machine. I actually got to spend some time inside of the NYPD when I was out there back in high school, when I was kind of on that track to be a police officer, and kind of saw the ins and outs and meet some of the people. I went on a ride along with NYPD actually. And it was very eye-opening, because just look at, you know, you imagine, you know, they've got to be this, they're a massive police force, but then yet they're responsible for an even bigger city. And I remember them telling me that they are completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
With the sheer amount of cases and crime. And I mean, I think the same could be argued for most departments across the country these days, is like, they're all, you know, kind of, you know, underfunded, and, you know, they don't have the resource. They don't have even the people joining the force anymore. I don't know about you. I've seen a lot of police recruitment ads. Maybe it's just me. That's just what I get served, but it's crazy. It's like every department's like really, really trying hard to recruit police officers.
I mean, it plays into that, like Jennifer was found by a volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
how
police had swept the area, but
35 days of searching.
Yeah. So it ended up, the police couldn't even spend the resources to find the body. It was some retired firefighter who had to find him.
Which, shout out to that guy. And that proves just how important volunteers are in searching for missing people.
When the community comes together, it's kind of inspiring.
Totally. So, yeah, we definitely want to know your thoughts on this one. Danny, did you have any final thoughts? Or, I mean, there's
really not much else to say. Even though I don't think that he did do it, I'm happy he's in prison, because either way, he still is a monster.
Yeah, he is a menace.
Yeah, I mean, thank God they got him 25 to life for kidnapping.
Yeah.
And he didn't get out sooner than that, and he'll likely die in prison, which I think is right where he belongs at the end of the day. So, but yeah, I hope for the sake of the victims' families that, you know, something pops up at some point in the future, which is why it's always good to continue telling their stories and keep these cases alive, because you just never know. I mean, cases get solved 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, and, you know, it's still worth it at the end of the day to provide some more clarity and answers for the families of these missing people. So let us know your thoughts down below. I want to kind of wrap up this one with maybe just a little tribute with some victims' photos and some information on their cases as well. So we'll catch you guys next time.